dance in the United States. I do not want to talk about fields outside of that because that is not my expertise. So I'm looking at, leaders specifically in higher education and, like I said, possibly some artistic directors who may be feeling these same pressures. And the ones that I have highlighted or bolded are the ones I'm specifically going to speak about today. But I am going to talk about the history. Who gets to lead or who historically has been chosen to lead in our field, right? Sexism, racism, insular thinking, cult of personality, another one, a capitalist market, right? That's just a force that unfortunately we can't ignore in the United States, in my opinion. Trust me, I worked in Europe with many dance companies. It was fabulous. Oh my gosh, I got health insurance. I was treated like a human being, government and state-sponsored art was fantastic. And then I came back here and I went, what in the world am I going to do in this society that I'm facing? Within that capitalist society, I'm also going to talk a little bit in terms of thriving. What areas are thriving in it? I think also to recognize not just the actual market in terms of financial implications of being in a capitalist society, but also in the United States. I don't want to go into a long diatribe, but if you know your history of dance in the United States, it isn't really that welcome. I mean, particularly if you think of the colonization of this country, right? That dance was really pushed away when it comes to, obviously, the indigenous people. We could go on and on. But we're fighting an uphill battle, and I think the history of that is important to recognize. Waning audiences, we all talk about the COVID effect, right? What happened during COVID, how hard it has been to come back from that. And then the other one, obviously, I'm going to highlight, again, the bolded ones I'll talk about, the rise in technology. We can fight it all we want. It's a reality. Now, the thing that I'd like to talk about too later on is we offer things that are the antidote to it. And that's one of the things I think that we don't talk about enough. I'll talk about the term you've probably heard before, digital detox, right? Specifically in the performing arts, we offer what I would argue younger audiences are looking for, right? And even sort of audiences, across America. But we'll talk about specifically the history, right, of dance, the capitalist market, right, and the rise of technology in specifically the surviving part of this conversation. So specifically looking at the history of leadership in concert dance, like I said, within the United States specifically. As Tanya mentioned, right, looking at ballet as, as kind of the start of it. This is not me saying, by the way, I by no means think that ballet is the foundation of dance. Thank you, I'll just put that out there. But this idea of someone at the top, right, ruling over what happens below is something we have inherited. And because of that, there are things very clear. Now, a lot of the statistics I have up here from the Dance Data Project. Does everybody know what that is? If you don't, you should look at it. It is phenomenal. They took a look at dance companies, they look at contemporary, they look at ballet, I think specifically. They list payment, right, contracts, everything, artistic leadership, donors across the country, and it's a great way to look and see what people are doing and using data as the source. So, simply put, in the United States, right, because of this history, my argument, right, it is still a very male-dominated leader area, despite it being a predominantly, right, self-identifying female, right, system. Right, so in 2024, Dance Data Project, right, of the 154 artistic directors in the U.S., right, 150 of the ballet companies, 61 are women, so 39% and 59.7, right, are male, and 0.6 are gender expansive, right? Also then jumping ahead, right, and there's another statistic down there, you've also then got white dominated. So in our own culture, right, the most common ethnicity, again, according to the Dance Data Project, and then also the other one is Zippia, which is another great website for finding data. And Zippia, by the way, doesn't look only at dance companies, they look at dance at large, right? So that's everything from dance studios to, dance schools, fill in the blank. So that's where the statistic comes from. But 67% of all directors in dance are identified as white. Comparatively, 11.4% are of Asian descent, 9.9% of Hispanic or Latino or Latinx, and then 7%, right, of Black. So long story short, the history we've inherited, right, is something that we have to combat. And my argument today is that we need to figure out how to make sure that we start training people for leadership in spite of this history. And I'll also talk about trying to upend the history itself. A couple other things I think inherited from that, right? That a leader or a director must be a choreographer or an artist. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, right? But like, what if we think about leadership? Raise your hand right now if you're in sort of leadership position. I think Tanya set us up well for this. How much of that position, right, based on your contract, let's put it that way, right, specifically mentions your artistry? Right? And yet, somehow, I feel like there is this idea ever prevalent, and it's not just in dance. If you read the book, and I'll talk about it later, Run It Like a Business, it's pervasive in the music industry, specifically opera and classical music. I would argue it's pervasive in theater as well to some extent, that the artist, right, or in this case, our case, the choreographer, that is the next step. We go from dancer to choreographer to leader. But nowhere along that training process are those individuals trained actually in the skills that we also need as leaders. Not saying that what we bring as artists isn't value. Again, based on this morning session, we bring a lot of value. But what are the things outside that we need to learn about? And then finally, one of the things, again, in our history is that what I call the mom and pop syndrome. Most dance companies in America, and even, again, myself speaking from my own institution, dance programs or departments, started by an individual, right? It's this small business idea. The challenge is that what that presents us is when that person, when that mother and father, that mom and pop, fill in the blank, that founder goes away, what happens? Right? Because ultimately, the identity of that business is the person. And so what happens to that, whether it's a dance company, whether it's a dance program, fill in the blank, what happens to them when that person is gone, if they are the thing? Right? And so I don't think that we've given enough thought and credence and an attempt to address this in the ever-changing world of dance today. Another challenge, like I said, operating within a capitalistic society. I talk about a couple things here. My apologies. These slides are available, I believe will be available to you, so I'm going to kind of breeze through. But one of the things to think about. One of the things I think that makes performing art so phenomenal is that in and of itself, it is not competitive. Now, we have created a competitive version of it. But that being said, one of the things we have to fight, if you look at the most successful model out there, it is Major League Sports, whether it's the NFL, right, the MLB, or the NHL. And I have that listed up here between 22 and 2023. The 5 major U.S. sports, which would be the NFL, the NHL, the Major League NBA, that's National Basketball, whatever. The 5 where yeah, you can see how big I am on sports. Long story short, they generated $4.9 billion in the United States. And my argument, this is a Matt Farmer bias, that's a term I always use when I'm teaching my students. My Matt Farmer bias is that because it leans into the tribalistic instinct of humans, right? Right? I'm better than you because my team beat you. I have a flag I can wave, I have colors that I identify with, and a symbol, right, that is I can now tie my identity to. And the question is, how do we fight that? Because ultimately, I would argue that's why we've seen the rise in dance competitions. It plays into that instinctual tribalism. But ultimately, our Matt Farmer bias, at its core, should not be that. It's actually about community building, right? It's about, right, the bigger picture. And so, but that is something we have to recognize in a capitalistic market, that art form is pushing against, right, the actual financial incentive to separate people versus bring them together. 501c3 status, I talked about that a little bit. In terms of, again, I call it like the mom and pop or the small business idea that we build it from the ground up. Market analysis, trending versus fads. I've seen this a lot in my short time on this beautiful planet. That even in dance, in art, fill in the blank, fads come. And knowing the difference between a trend and a fad is so important, right? And this is something that business people will talk about in the corporate setting all the time. Is this a trend or is it a fad, right? And it doesn't mean we can't jump on a fad, but if we tie our ship to the fad, we run the risk of the ship sinking, right? Because the fad is too heavy to drag once it's finally passed. And then branding, that's another thing. And I'll talk about this in terms of the thriving aspect. Again, like I said, particularly, I can speak for my own department. My department was founded in the late 70s by a beautiful, wonderful woman named Maxine DeBryan. She was the face of the program. She made it happen for over 30 years, and then when she retired and passed, what is it now? What does it huge credit out to my predecessor, Linda Graham, saw that when she became chair and said, I need to say, okay, how do we make this program bigger than this woman's name? How do we shift it into its new evolution? And I don't think that that's always, and so I give a huge amount of credit to Linda for that. I don't think that that's always a conversation that's had. So that's, again, another challenge I think that we can face. The final one, right, again, this idea of surviving. All this leads to us, right, as artists, leaders going, I just feel like I can't keep up. I feel like I'm treading water. Put in the analogy, myself included. I've said that a number of times. I think even as of 6 months ago, I said to my wife, I can't do it anymore. And she did what she does best, which is like, let me salt for a couple days, and then she's like, okay, let's go. But the final one is technology, right? And I say this is the existential threat that actually we all knew was actually coming. We all really knew it was coming. And so these are just some statistics about how technology is upending the performance art field. Simple ones, right? The average person, right, spends 143 minutes or 2 hours and 23 minutes on social media every day. A bigger one, streaming, right? You've got, according to Forbes and one poll survey, right, that the average of Americans spend on average 3 hours and 9 minutes per day streaming. That means that's the time they're not in our seats. So much so, when I put this quote down here, the CEO of Netflix in 2017 in a Forbes article said that Netflix's, I'm paraphrasing, Netflix's greatest competitor is sleep.
Wow.
And it's an icky statement. But what I would argue is it led to a phenomenal breakthrough. If anybody's ever streamed on Netflix, and actually every streaming network followed it from this point on. Did you ever notice that if you've ever streamed something, does it ever tell you or ask you if you want to watch the next episode?
Yeah.
It doesn't. It just automatically goes. Netflix came up with that because they determined if we give people the choice, and sleep is our biggest one. They go, oh man, it's 11:30. I should go to bed. But if they get rid of it, I can watch one more, right? So I'm not saying I agree with the CEO of Netflix. Hear me loudly, but technology is a very real thing, and of course the invention of AI is a whole other cog into the wheel. Let's say that's going to be thrown. So all this being said, that's the thrive or the surviving part, right? Again, forgive my little Getty images. I had this great idea of having like Johnny Depp sailing on whatever Pirates of the Caribbean, and again I was like, oh yeah, that's copyright too. So with that, the question is, how do we go from that drowning feeling to thriving? The first thing I would say is that we actually have to upend. So looking back at what I presented, we have to upend the historic structure of the way that leaders have been picked. Right? So number one, I say expect different but not more from our leaders. That includes, and I was talking with somebody earlier about this, like we have to give them space, we have to give them time, right? The more we add on time, right, unfortunately, is a commodity. And the more we throw on our leaders, the less time they have to actually do the things they need to do. Also introducing them to outside organizations, I'll talk about that. Thinking about certifications, my wife is actually the director for process improvement and quality for 4 different hospitals, and she's been a lifeline to me as I brought home these questions and concerns. And she'll say, well, you know that there's a program out there. Six Sigma is one that actually she talks about a lot. And she goes, yeah, it'll help you to learn how to have a better workplace culture. And this world has been open to me that I never knew. And so forgive me if I'm saying things that you already know. But reaching outside of dance into these other areas, and I found solutions that I had no idea were there, right? So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and write another book about, hey, here, or fill in the blank, right? Or come up with a podcast or whatever, it made me recognize that a lot of the things we struggle with, right, if we're honest, already there. We just have to look outside of what is offered within our specific field. Number 2, upending the historic structure. The top-down approach. So it's not that I'm arguing that you don't need somebody with the title of fill in the blank, director, leader, etc. What I would say though is that workplace culture, and that's a very corporate term, but I'm going to use it at the risk of sounding corporate, is so important. And here's the big difference that I, for analogy, I would use. Being a theater major, has anybody here done acting or been in a show, play? Is the rehearsal process different or the exact same as dance? Very different. There is a director, but how much voice do the actors have in the process? A lot of choice making, yes? And so a good friend of mine, she said her daughter, when she went in and she goes, I never realized the difference until I heard the difference between a choreographer and a director talk. A choreographer sets a work on people. The director oversees the rehearsal process. And so I think that sort of upending structure, again, if your name is on the dance company, by all means, I get it. I, as a choreographer myself, yes, there are times when I tell my dancers, like, no, just do it. But from a team perspective within my department, yes, I'm the one who gets to catch the flack. Yes, I'm the one who has to report the administration. But what I really see myself as is I say, if I'm doing my job correctly, my team never experiences what I have to experience. And I take into the idea of what my wife taught me. She said, if you're successful, your job will no longer be necessary. You have empowered your team with the skills and the knowledge, right? And really what she's talking about is leadership programming, right? If I were to go away tomorrow, who takes over? And hopefully I don't have that fear of, oh my gosh, right? Suddenly now, right? Or we call it succession planning, right? Suddenly now everything falls apart. So that's part of this upending the historic structure. Start preparing, like I said, future leaders. This is one of the things, I'm just going to call it what it is at the risk of sounding offensive. We got to get rid of, we need boys. I don't think anybody in this room has that, but I think, again, looking back at the Dance Data Project, while we say as an industry that we don't need it, it hasn't actually proven. And so that's one of the things I would push is to say we still need to keep fighting that good fight, along with things like women in leadership roles, right? Non-white individuals in leadership roles. Also understanding, a quick slide, the changing nature. Again, you guys will have these slides available to you. This again is just another slide showing that each of these areas has a lot of crossover with them, right? What I'd like to argue is the crossover is the part we need to carry, but there are other parts that need the training. So again, it's not that what we bring as an artist or a teacher or a dancer are not necessary, but they are absolute. There is additional training I think that's needed. A couple of last thoughts here as I wrap up. Number one, as a leader, authenticity instead of charisma. We're in a performing art, and so that's one of those things that is celebrated. I've highlighted donors want a relation, not transaction. This was proven. We just built a $4 million facility at my institution, and it all came about because somebody once said, hey, are you willing to meet with this person? I said, yes. I sat with her for probably 4 hours. It wasn't great use of my time, but you know what? At the end, I developed a wonderful respect for this donor and vice versa, and that was the person who gave, right? And so I think understanding that takes time. Bring your whole self, right? But also sometimes we have to play the part. Lastly, be personal, but take nothing personally. As someone who's a words of affirmation person, that was really hard for me to learn. Again, I'll look through this in our final slides. I think an important thing when it comes to, and this is again something corporate America uses, but they say employees don't leave bad jobs, they leave toxic leaders or toxic work environments. I think that's something that, again, I give you a list of skills or things that I've discovered. Again, for those of you who are seasoned, you might be like, yep, I get it. So I apologize, but some of this is my own personal journey, confessedly, because again, I was sort of into a leadership position because it's like, oh, you have charisma, you're a great choreographer, and you had a beautiful dance career. You're going to be a great leader. And I, 3 years in, went, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. There's so much I don't know. Marketing and branding, this is one I'll put out there. To highlight, I'll just highlight the last slide, I think that I bolded. Transitioning organizations from namesake to symbols. A good example would be Apple. Those of you who are young enough, old enough, you'll remember Apple when Steve Jobs was the face. But when he transitioned, right? But actually, if we think of Apple, we think of the symbol now. And I think they did a really great job of learning how to transition, again, that leader who started the company. And that to me is why, right, companies that I've listed here have sort of continued beyond, right, that founding member's success. And as somebody who deeply loves dance and art, that is something that's so near and dear to me, to wanting to see it continue to thrive. Last thing I'll say, this kind of came to a conversation earlier, and this is, again, for those of you who are more seasoned than I, you may be like, I'm there. This has been a huge existential crisis for me, right? Don't get me wrong, I still choreograph, I still teach, but as I continue to fold more into leadership, I had to change my understanding of what it meant to be a successful artist. Because in my mind, it was, well, unless I'm choreographing, I'm not an artist anymore. And so that took me a long time to really make that transition. And so that's why I have that last thing that says, love and live the next phase of your professional career. And that took me, again, I'm speaking for me personally, but learning to say, oh, I am still an artist if I, shameless plug, write a book, right? I am still an artist, right, if I am speaking. It never leaves me. But I think that can be something that sometimes we struggle with. And so I think I just given some suggestions of things that I've seen colleagues do as a way to continue. Not that I still choreograph a lot because it's my great joy. Last thing, some resources. These are all resources, and I have a list in the slides of these books and where to buy them that I think every leader in the arts could benefit from. Who Moved My Cheese, that's an old one. So if you haven't read it, highly recommended. A Perfect Mess, if you're in higher education and a leader, oh my gosh, it changed my life. It helped me understand, oh, this is why I feel this way, because historically, this just wasn't built for me, right? It is a wonderful read on the history of higher education in the United States, and I think, at least for me, it took away a lot of the anxiety I was feeling. Robot Proof, that came out a couple years ago regarding AI. Run It Like a Business, that's a brand new one. I think it came out last year. I think the executive director, I can't remember, Los Angeles Symphony, Philadelphia, but talking and kind of, again, encouraging the things that I'm talking about. And then, of course, the one that Tanya mentioned, I had not heard of, so you better believe I'm going to read it. And these are some of the books, along with some other ones. Also recommended the Harvard Business Review. There are just something I subscribe to, again, spurred on by my wife. I was like, really? I'm not a business person, this is stupid. And the amount of resources and the amount of articles I've read that are directly translatable to dance, I have found phenomenal. They have just saved me time and again. Last additional resources, some of the things. I'm a big fan, if you're a leader, take an acting class. It's so wonderful. Engage with fellow leaders, as Tanya said, in your other arts organizations. It's nice to know that you're not alone. Also engaging with leaders outside the dance field. That has been one of my biggest benefits, reaching out to people. And I've actually been very surprised how many leaders who are not in arts organizations who are willing to give their time. Literally, an email, hi, this is who I am, blah, blah, blah. And probably I'd say for every 10 emails, I'll get 4 back. Let's say, yeah, or they'll give me a recommendation. Well, I don't have time, but consider this person or consider this resource. Shameless plug. As a part of this idea, like I said, re-identify myself, I did write a book teaching dance improvisation. I have copies if you're interested. The bigger thing for me about that book was it really was the start of my journey of, again, reimagining myself as a leader and understanding that it's okay if you don't have all the information, because if you have the right people in place, you will learn the information. And so anybody who's ever written a book can attest, it is the biggest ego punch you'll take in your life. But it's also, in that humbling experience, wonderfully uplifting, because it helps you solidify what you believe, what you think, and also makes you aware of all the things you don't know. And so that's one of the things that I can't recommend enough is, again, finding other things to do in the arts fields that will continue to grow you. I know that was lightning, but like I said, I think all of these resources are going to be available after the symposium. So thank you.
We can take questions at this time. Questions?
Yeah, thanks.
No questions, okay. Thank you.